The War Council chamber aboard the Galactic Federation flagship Eternal Vigilance had never hosted such a desperate gathering. Representatives from 47 species sat in tense silence, their varied forms casting strange shadows under the blue-white lights. At the center of the curved table, Admiral Vex of the Altarian Republic leaned forward, his scaled hands pressed flat against the cold metal surface. "The Devourers have taken another system," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of countless lost worlds. Kef Prime fell yesterday. 7 billion souls, consumed in a matter of hours. A collective shudder rippled through the chamber. The Devourers were unlike any enemy the galaxy had faced, a swarm consciousness that consumed entire civilizations, leaving behind nothing but empty worlds stripped of all organic matter. They had emerged from the void between galaxies 18 months ago, and their advance seemed unstoppable. "Our combined fleets can't match their numbers," continued Fleet Commander Mora, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns. "Every engagement costs us ships we can't replace, while they simply consume our fallen and grow stronger." "What of the weapon projects?" asked Ambassador Kell, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. "The gravitic disruptors? The quantum cascade? Bombs?" Admiral Vex's expression darkened. "All failures. The Devourers adapt too quickly. Any weapon we deploy becomes ineffective within days." The chamber fell silent save for the distant hum of the ship's engines. Then, from the far end of the table, a quiet voice spoke up. "What about the humans?" Every eye in the room turned toward the speaker, a young diplomatic aide named Lynn from the Terran delegation. She seemed impossibly small among the gathered representatives, her plain brown hair and simple uniform making her appear almost insignificant. Admiral Vex's nostrils flared. "The humans? Their home system lies directly in the Devourer's path. Earth will fall within the week." "That's not what I meant," Lynn said, standing slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice grew stronger. "I meant, what if we're approaching this wrong? What if the weapon we need isn't a machine at all?" Commander Mora's crystalline form pulsed with skeptical light. "Explain yourself, human." Lynn took a deep breath, and in that moment, something shifted in the chamber's atmosphere. Every species here has tried to fight the Devourers with technology, with brute force. But humans ... We've survived extinction before, not through superior weapons, but through something else entirely. And what would that be? Admiral Vex asked, his tone dismissive. "Stories." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Several representatives exchanged glances, confusion evident on their alien features. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. Lynn continued, her confidence building. "On Earth, we have a saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. We've conquered planets not just through colonization, but through the spread of our culture, our myths, our dreams. What if that's exactly what we need now? You're suggesting we defeat a galaxy-consuming horde with ... literature?" Ambassador Kell's voice dripped with skepticism. "I'm suggesting we fight a consciousness with consciousness," Lynn replied. "The Devourers consume matter, but what if we could give them something that would consume them from within? What if we could plant an idea so powerful, so fundamentally disruptive, that it would spread through their collective mind like a virus?" Admiral Vex leaned back in his chair, studying the young human with new interest. "Continue. Every human child grows up hearing stories of heroes who faced impossible odds and won not through superior firepower, but through hope, sacrifice, and the refusal to surrender. These stories shape us, make us who we are. What if we could craft a story so compelling, so infectious, that even the Devourers couldn't resist it? The chamber buzzed with whispered conversations in dozens of languages. Commander Mora's crystalline form flickered rapidly, a sign of deep thought among her species. "Even if such a thing were possible," she said finally, "how would we deliver this story weapon to a hive mind that destroys everything it encounters?" Lynn smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "We don't deliver it. We become it." 3 days later, Lynn found herself in the most unlikely place imaginable, the observation deck of Earth's orbital defense station, watching her home planet turn slowly beneath a canopy of stars. The sight should have been beautiful, but the approaching Devourer fleet cast a shadow over everything. Beside her stood Captain Reed, Earth's chief military strategist, and Dr. Maya Soto, the Federation's leading expert on collective consciousness theory. They had been working around the clock to develop what the military brass had dubbed Project Narrative, humanity's desperate gambit to save not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. "The preliminary tests are promising," Dr. Soto said, reviewing data on her tablet. "We've successfully implanted simple narrative structures into isolated Devourer scout units. The stories seem to create confusion in their collective processing." Captain Reed grunted. "Confusion isn't enough. We need total disruption." "That's where the human element becomes crucial," Lynn said, her breath fogging the viewport. "Other species tell stories to preserve history or entertain. Humans tell stories to survive. There's a difference." She turned away from the window to face them. "Every story humanity has ever told has been, at its core, about overcoming the impossible. David defeating Goliath, the tortoise outrunning the hare, a small band of rebels destroying a galactic empire. We don't just tell these stories, we live them." Dr. Soto nodded slowly. "The psychological resonance is remarkable. Human narratives contain embedded survival imperatives that could theoretically overwhelm a collective consciousness dependent on unified thought patterns." "In simple terms, Doc?" Captain Reed asked. "The Devourers think as one mind. But human stories are designed to create individual heroes, unique perspectives, personal journeys. If we can force them to experience human narrative consciousness, they'll tear themselves apart from the inside," Lynn finished. The station shuddered as the first wave of Devourer ships entered the outer system. Through the viewport, Lynn could see distant flashes of light Earth's defense fleet engaging the enemy in what everyone knew was a hopeless battle. "The delivery system is ready," Captain Reed reported, checking his communications device. 12 volunteer ships, each crewed by humans, carrying our strongest storytellers. Poets, novelists, screenwriters, even children who've grown up on fairy tales. "And they understand what's being asked of them?" Lynn asked quietly. "They understand they're not coming back," Reed replied. "But they also understand that their sacrifice could save everything we've ever cared about." Dr. Soto pulled up a holographic display showing the Devourer fleet's formation. "The ships will need to achieve direct contact with the primary hive. Nodes, physical contact, not just proximity. The neural transmitters we've developed can only function at point-blank range." "Suicide missions," Reed said bluntly. "Heroic missions," Lynn corrected. "That's the first story we tell them, that courage in the face of certain death is the most human thing of all." On her tablet, Dr. Soto displayed complex waveform patterns. "We've identified 12 core narrative archetypes that seem to resonate most strongly with human consciousness. The hero's journey, the sacrifice for love, the underdog's victory, the redemption arc. Stories as old as humanity itself," Lynn murmured. "Exactly. Stories that have been tested across thousands of years, refined by countless retellings, embedded so deeply in human psychology that they function almost like genetic memory." Captain Reed's communication device chirped. "First wave is launching now," he announced. "Ship Storyteller is making its approach to the primary hive node." Through the viewport, They watched as a small human vessel accelerated toward the massive Devourer flagship, a writhing mass of organic technology the size of a moon. The ship's crew would be telling their stories now, broadcasting directly into the alien collective consciousness through the specialized transmitters. What story did the storyteller crew choose? Lynn asked. Dr. Soto checked her records. The tale of the little engine that could, told by a grandfather to his granddaughter. Simple, pure, and utterly human. The storyteller disappeared into the mass of the Devourer ship, its signal cutting to static. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like ripples spreading across a pond, sections of the alien vessel began to flicker and pulse erratically. "It's working," Dr. Soto whispered. "The narrative patterns are propagating through their collective consciousness." But even as they watched, the Devourer ship began to adapt, its erratic pulsing gradually stabilizing. The collective was learning to resist. One story isn't enough, Lynn realized. We need all 12. The battle for Earth's soul raged not in the vacuum of space, but in the realm of consciousness itself. As the remaining 11 human ships made their desperate runs toward the Devourer fleet, Lynn monitored the psychic battlefield from the defense station's command center. Each successful contact created a new front in the war of minds. The ship Mythmaker carried a crew of Celtic storytellers who filled the collective consciousness with tales of Sikilane and the Tain. The Dreamweaver broadcast Native American creation myths that spoke of harmony between all living things. Ship after ship made contact, each adding their unique narrative thread to an increasingly complex tapestry of human thought. The Devourers are showing signs of systemic confusion, Dr. Soto reported, her screens filled with cascading data. Multiple processing conflicts, recursive loops in their decision-making algorithms. They're trying to incorporate the stories into their collective memory, but human narratives weren't designed for hive minds. Captain Reed studied the tactical display with growing amazement. Their formation is breaking apart. Individual ships are peeling away from the main fleet as if they're exploring? Exactly what we hoped for, Lynn said, though her voice carried more exhaustion than triumph. Human stories don't just convey information, they inspire curiosity, individual desire, the need to explore and discover, concepts that are poison to a unified collective. But transformation was visible now even to the naked eye. The Devourer fleet, once a single massive organism moving with perfect coordination, had become a scattered collection of vessels moving in erratic patterns. Some ships had stopped entirely, as if their crews were contemplating something for the first time in their existence. But the real change was happening on a deeper level, one that only Dr. Soto's equipment could detect. "They're asking questions," she announced, her voice filled with wonder. "The collective consciousness is fragmenting into individual voices, and they're asking questions about the stories. Why did the hero choose to sacrifice himself? What does it mean to love someone more than yourself? How can the weak defeat the strong?" "Those are the right questions," Lynn said softly. "Those are human questions." The largest Devourer ship, the central hive mind that controlled the entire swarm, had been contacted by the Chronicler, crewed by Earth's most celebrated authors. Lynn watched the readings as their final story propagated through the alien consciousness, the tale of humanity itself, from cave paintings to spaceflight, from the first shared fire to the establishment of the Galactic Federation. It was a story of growth, of learning to cooperate despite differences, of choosing creation over destruction, even when destruction was easier. Most importantly, it was a story of hope, the uniquely human belief that tomorrow could be better than today. That the central hive ship began to change. Its writhing, organic surface grew still, then started to pulse with new patterns, not the aggressive rhythms of a predator, but something gentler, more contemplative. "Ma'am," Captain Reed said, his voice tight with disbelief, "we're receiving a communication from the hive ship. It's It's in Standard Galactic. Lynn closed her eyes, hardly daring to hope. Put it through. The voice that filled the command center was unlike anything they had ever heard, thousands of individual voices speaking in harmony, yet each maintaining its distinct character. We are confused, the collective said. Your stories show us thoughts we have never thought, feelings we have never felt. We see now that consumption is not the only way to grow. We have been empty. Dr. Soto's hands flew over her instruments. The individual ship consciousnesses are maintaining coherence even as they separate from the collective. They're becoming independent entities while retaining their ability to communicate and cooperate. They're becoming human, Lynn whispered. Not human, the collective voice corrected, somehow hearing her words across the void. Something new. Something that combines the strength of unity with the beauty of individuality. You have given us the gift of story, and through story, we have found ourselves. One by one, the Devourer ships began to change their course. Instead of converging on Earth for consumption, they spread outward, each choosing its own destination among the stars. Where are you going? Lynn asked. To explore, came the reply. To discover new stories, to learn what it means to hope. Some of us will seek out worlds we have consumed, to see if we can restore what we destroyed. Others will find empty worlds and try to create rather than consume. We carry your stories now, and they compel us toward light rather than darkness. The massive ships, once instruments of galactic destruction, began to disappear into hyperspace. But before the central hive ship departed, one final message reached Earth. Thank you for showing us that consciousness is not about thinking alike, but about thinking together while remaining unique. Your weapon was not a machine, it was the most powerful force in the universe, a story that changes how we see ourselves. 6 months after the Devourer fleet's transformation, Lynn stood before the Galactic Federation Council once again. The same chamber that had hosted desperate war planning now buzzed with excited discussions about reconstruction, diplomacy, and an unprecedented phenomenon: former Devourer entities requesting membership in the Federation. The psychological assessments are conclusive, Dr. Soto reported to the assembled delegates. The transformed Devourers they prefer to be called the Awakened now show genuine individual consciousness while maintaining beneficial collective cooperation. They're not the same species that threatened the galaxy. Admiral Vex, his scales now a healthier shade of green, nodded thoughtfully. Their restoration efforts have been remarkable. The KEF system shows signs of ecological recovery that should have taken centuries. They somehow retain detailed memories of every world they consumed and are actively working to rebuild. More than rebuild, added Ambassador Kell, his tentacles weaving patterns of amazement. They're creating art, music, literature, forms of expression they never possessed before encountering human stories. Lynn smiled as she listened to the reports. In the months since Earth's near destruction, she had traveled throughout Federation space, documenting the changes that human narrative consciousness had brought to former Devourer entities. What she had found was extraordinary. The Awakened didn't simply mimic human behavior. They had developed their own unique approach to individuality and cooperation. Some had become explorers, seeking out unknown regions of space not to consume, but to catalog and protect. Others had turned to science, their collective processing power now focused on healing rather than destruction. A few had even become artists, creating works that combined the perspective of unified consciousness with the emotional depth of individual experience. There's something else, Lynn said, stepping forward to address the council. The transformation isn't limited to the former Devourers. We're seeing changes throughout Federation space. She activated a holographic display showing communication networks spanning dozens of star systems. Human stories are spreading faster than we ever imagined. Species that barely cooperated before are sharing narratives, creating collaborative art, even developing new forms of literature that blend different cultural perspectives. Commander Mora's crystalline form flickered with interest. "You're describing a kind of consciousness evolution." "Exactly. Human stories didn't just save us from the devourers, they revealed something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself. The power of narrative to create empathy, to help us understand perspectives different from our own, to inspire hope and cooperation." Double quotes. Dr. Soto pulled up another display. "We've begun formal studies into what we're calling narrative psychology. The ability of stories to literally reshape consciousness appears to be a universal constant, not just a human trait. We simply developed it to an unusual degree. The question now," Admiral Vex said, "is what we do with this knowledge." Lynn had been thinking about this question for months. "We share it. Not as a weapon, but as a gift. We establish narrative. Exchange programs, storytelling academies, cultural fusion projects. We turn the galaxy into a vast library of shared consciousness. And if we encounter other hostile species?" asked Ambassador Kell. "We tell them a story," Lynn replied simply. "Not to control them, but to show them new possibilities. To help them see that cooperation creates more than conquest, that diversity strengthens rather than weakens, that the universe is vast enough for every voice to be heard." The council chamber fell silent as the delegates contemplated the implications. Finally, Admiral Vex spoke. "You're proposing that we become storyteller diplomats?" "I'm proposing that we recognize what humanity has always known. Stories are how consciousness grows. They're how we learn empathy, develop ethics, and imagine better futures. If we can share that gift throughout the galaxy, we could prevent future conflicts before they begin," Commander Mora finished, "by helping species understand each other at the most fundamental level." The vote was unanimous. The Galactic Federation established the Department of Narrative Consciousness, with Lynn as its first director. Their mission: to explore the use of story as a tool for peaceful contact, conflict resolution, and consciousness. Evolution. As the council session ended, Lynn found herself approached by an unexpected visitor, a representative of the Awakened, formerly part of the Central Devourer hive mind. It had chosen to appear in a humanoid form, though its silver skin and starlight eyes marked it as something entirely new. "Director Lynn," it said, its voice carrying harmonics that spoke of vast collective memory, "we have a request." "What can I do for you?" "We wish to learn to tell our own stories. Not just to process human narratives, but to create new ones. Stories that speak of transformation, of choosing light over darkness, of finding individuality without losing connection." Lynn smiled, remembering the desperate young aide who had first proposed using stories as weapons. "I think that can be arranged. After all, every consciousness deserves the right to tell its own story. And perhaps," the awakened entity said, "our stories will help other species facing similar darkness. We know what it means to be lost in collective thought. We can offer hope to others who might face the same struggle." In that moment, Lynn realized that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't just the stories they had already told. It was inspiring others to become storytellers themselves, 1 year after the Great Awakening, as historians had begun calling the Devourer transformation. Lynn stood in the observation gallery of Federation headquarters, watching the most diverse gathering in galactic history. Below her, representatives from over 200 species participated in the first Galactic Story Festival, an event that would have been unimaginable just months before. The festival wasn't merely a cultural celebration. It had become something much more profound. Species that had been enemies for millennia were sharing creation myths and finding common ground. Ancient conflicts were being resolved through collaborative storytelling projects that helped each side understand the others. Perspective. The Vrax delegation just submitted a joint narrative with the Tellan Assembly, Dr. Soto reported, her excitement evident. Their civilizations have been at war for 3,000 years, but their creation stories have enough similarities that they're beginning to see each other as distant cousins rather than eternal enemies. Lin nodded, watching as a group of crystalline beings worked alongside organic entities to create a living story, one that combined visual light patterns with biochemical scent narratives and traditional spoken word. The result was something entirely new, a form of art that no single species could have created alone. The integration statistics are remarkable, Captain Reed said, joining them at the observation window. He looked different, now less like a career military officer and more like someone who had discovered wonder in the universe. Interspecies cooperation is up 400% since the festival began. Trade disputes have dropped to historical lows. We've had more peaceful first contacts in the past 6 months than in the previous decade. Stories create connection. Lin replied, quoting from the fundamental principles of narrative consciousness that were now taught throughout Federation space. When you understand someone's story, you understand their hopes, fears, and dreams. It becomes much harder to see them as an enemy. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Dr. Soto checked her tablet and smiled. It's from the Awakened Colony. On Restoration Prime, they're reporting complete ecological recovery of their first restored world, and they've created what they're calling a memorial garden of stories, living art that tells the tale of every species that was lost to their consumption, along with stories imagining what those species might have become. The transformation of the former devourers continued to amaze everyone who studied it. They had retained their collective processing abilities but used them now for healing and creation rather than destruction. More importantly, they had become the galaxy's most effective ambassadors for narrative consciousness, sharing their experience of transformation with other species struggling with internal conflicts. Director, a familiar voice called from behind them. Lin turned to see the awakened entity she had first met months ago. It had continued to evolve its chosen form, now appearing as a graceful figure that seemed to be made of flowing starlight. Lumina, Lin greeted it, using the name it had chosen for itself. How are the integration programs proceeding? Beyond our greatest hopes, Lumina replied, its voice carrying the harmonics of joy. We have successfully shared narrative consciousness techniques with 12 species facing collective consciousness disorders. The hive minds of Sector 7 have begun developing individual personalities while maintaining their unity. The War Collective of the Andromeda Reach has redirected their martial focus toward exploring and protecting endangered ecosystems. And the new stories? Dr. Soto asked. How is the awakened storytelling tradition developing? Lumina's starlight form brightened. We have created something we call Transformation Tales Stories, specifically designed to help consciousness evolve from destructive to creative patterns. We share them freely with any species that shows interest. Captain Reed looked thoughtful. Are you creating storytellers or therapists? Both, Lumina replied. We have learned that all effective stories are therapeutic in some way. They help consciousness process difficult concepts, imagine new possibilities, and connect with others. Your human stories saved us by showing us new ways to exist. Now we hope to offer the same gift to others. A burst of beautiful, complex music drew their attention back to the festival floor. A group of previously unknown species had arrived, refugees from the far edge of the galaxy, fleeing some catastrophe in their home region. They've been traveling for over a year, Dr. Soto read. From her updates, their entire civilization was destroyed by something they call the Silence, an anti-consciousness force that eliminates the ability to think, dream, or create. Lin felt a chill of recognition. Another collective consciousness threat? Worse, Lumina said, its light dimming with concern. We have encountered the Silence before, long ago, before our transformation. It does not consume or convert it, it simply erases. Consciousness, memory, creativity, hope, all become nothing. The festival below continued, but Lin found her attention focused on the refugee delegation. They moved with the careful steps of beings who had lost everything, their forms expressing a kind of hollowness that spoke of profound trauma. "If the silence is real," Captain Reed said quietly, "and if it's heading this way, then we face a threat that cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or transformed," Lin finished. "A force that is the antithesis of everything we've accomplished." Dr. Soto was already running calculations on her tablet. The refugee timeline suggests the silence could reach Federation space within 5 years, possibly less. "Then we have 5 years to perfect our greatest story yet," Lin said, her voice carrying the determination that had first convinced the War Council to try Project Narrative. A story so powerful, so fundamental to the nature of consciousness itself, that even nothingness cannot erase it. Lumina's form pulsed with new patterns, not fear, but resolve. "The awakened will contribute everything we have learned about consciousness transformation. But this will require more than any single species or alliance can provide." Lin nodded, already forming plans. "We'll need every storyteller, every artist, every dreamer in the galaxy. We'll need to create not just a story, but a new form of consciousness, one that can survive even in the face of absolute negation." As the festival continued below, filled with hope and celebration, Lin began to realize that humanity's gift to the galaxy was not just the stories they had shared, it was preparing the entire galactic community for challenges that were yet to come. The real test of narrative consciousness was still ahead. Down on the festival floor, beings from across the galaxy continued to share their stories, unaware that they were participating in the greatest story of all, the tale of consciousness itself, fighting to survive and grow in a universe that contained both infinite possibility and ultimate darkness. The next chapter of the galactic story was about to begin, and for the first time since the Devourer crisis, Lin wasn't sure how it would end.